Hello and welcome to today's session, Bridging the Organizational Gaps with DevOps. Really exciting topic today, a really changing landscape and powerful landscape here that we have a lot to talk about in a short period of time. But as we get started here, let's just jump right into introductions. So first and foremost, my name is Paul Nashawaty, and I am a senior analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group, and I cover application and infrastructure modernization. So this topic is really near and dear to my heart. And when we talk about this area, we also need to see all the different research that we're going to share here and all the information that we're going to share here that kind of helps set that market landscape. I'm joined today with Logan. Logan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, Paul, thanks. Yep, my name is Logan. I'm the director at the Business Agility Enablement practice here at NTT DATA, and we are very passionate about helping people in the modern application development space. Today, I'm excited to help you understand some DevOps trends and also how we're partnering up with AWS to make that happen for our customers.
Thanks, Logan. Exciting times. I guess we'll just jump right into this data. And when we're looking at these organizational trends and we're looking at what's happening about bridging the gap, right? We have to understand how organizations view themselves, right? And what they kind of see how they act around themselves. So in a recent survey I took a poll and I took a test here to see what organizations were actually viewing themselves in a self-assessment. And 46% of organizations view themselves as mature, and 36% viewed themselves as very mature. So that's pretty exciting, right? Well, then when we double click down a little bit to really understand this, right, and see what does maturity mean, we came down to the point of asking these organizations about their business KPIs. And specifically around code releases, and asking their business KPIs around code releases. And with that said, the code releases that the businesses were trying to release, they came back with they wanted to release code on an hourly basis. Okay, so it's interesting when their businesses were saying that they want to release code on an hourly basis. And Logan, I want to ask you a question. What do you think? How many out of the respondents here, they're very mature organizations. They release code on an hourly basis. How many of them would you say, on a percentage, will release code on an hourly basis?
I would say between 2 and 3% of the businesses.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's take a look at the next slide. What we found was 7% of organizations release code on an hourly basis or more. We see that 30% release code on a weekly basis, right? So it's interesting to see the maturity level and how organizations view themselves as mature, but yet when it comes to their business KPIs, they're a little bit off, right, on their delivery. But one of the things we did find is organizations that are productive at releasing code on an hourly basis, they use common methodologies like DevOps and GitOps and develop on software development, Agile software development methodologies. So this is important to kind of consider is if your organization is using different tools or different methodologies, it's important to understand this. So Logan, I want to ask you, what do you think on this data?
I'm not surprised that we're close on the number there. What I think is the difference between organizations self-assessing maturity versus what you're finding is that the maturity level of the self-assessment isn't necessarily as data-driven like when they're thinking about it themselves, right? It's not as necessarily as data-driven as we're approaching the questions that we want to ask to get maturity. There's also a lack of difference fundamentally between what these organizations think is releasing on an hourly basis versus deploying on an hourly basis. And they may not think that deploying to production is what you're looking for, right? I think the other piece is the monthly or the every few hours folks are starting to approach the problem where they're actually starting to think about delivering smaller batch sizes of work. That is a very mature practice, and it does take a level of thinking and mindset and systems thinking that actually helps them to think small, aim small, miss small. Kind of the thing that Dad used to teach me when I was throwing a baseball, right? So the biggest thing I think is the maturity practices for those mature organizations aren't necessarily the same across the board. And we like to consult folks to take that smaller batch size approach because there are lots of benefits to it.
Yeah, Logan, that makes a lot of sense. I love that analogy of like think small, act small, because it's really focused on, you know, a specific task and very focused areas that the organization can drill down into. But, you know, releasing code is not always the kind of the only part that organizations have to think about here, right? So if we look at the next slide, we see that organizations are really, you know, they're delivering and releasing the code as we pointed out earlier. We see that 60+% can deliver and deploy code. But what's challenging here is when you think of that infinity loop, that CI/CD pipeline and that infinity loop, it's supposed to be continuous, right? And it's really more like a circle here, right? We see that there's a delivery and deployment, and then organizations are high-fiving going, hey, we got the code out the door, great. But what's kind of a little bit disturbing is if you look at that bottom graph there, almost 71% of organizations are not testing their code, right? And that's concerning because that introduces a customer experience problem, a customer journey problem, you know, not satisfied people. That introduces code issues, right, as well. So this is an area that I think is something that we should definitely make people aware of, right? Would you say?
Yep. It's a very big thing near and dear to my heart. I think the basic premise that we use is we start with build quality in, right? So if I take my point from the last statement, small batch sizes are super important to making sure that maturity is achieved. The continuous testing piece and addressing the need to test as close to code commit as possible with a small batch size starts to help people actually understand that testing can be way more simple than it might be in the past, right? Because, you know, if we take the opposite of that, I'm testing large batch sizes of change, that could be very complicated, very complex, very hard for organizations to deal with. And so it's kind of the anti-pattern is the big batch, big testing. The real pattern is that smaller, I can move faster, I'm more nimble to do the testing pieces.
Yeah, Logan, that makes sense. But what would you recommend to organizations that are maybe thinking about that now? Maybe the audience that's thinking about how they can pivot a little bit from their maybe the traditional way of doing it. What would you recommend to them?
So what I would recommend for them is embracing a more agile approach to the way that they're thinking about breaking up their work, right? So Agile has shown us that, again, I'm using the same words, small batch sizes are important. We're shrinking the amount of work that we take in over a shorter period of time. And maybe the biggest piece in not only adopting those agile processes or practices is the idea that we need to bring testing as a practice into the team. That means we need to bring testers as people onto the team. And we won't say that we're actually done with our work until that testing is complete. And that intrinsically motivates people to actually begin to automate that testing, which starts to bump up the amount of continuous testing that these organizations have. The key part that I like to see when teams actually begin to adopt these practices and they get motivated to do it is that they start to see that the automated testing isn't this extra task that they have to do. It's not extra effort that they don't look forward to. It becomes the safety net through which they can make the changes that they need to be customer centric.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I was going to ask the question, and you beat me to it, which is about the automation piece. Because, you know, when you think about this, and we tie it back to the previous conversation around maturity in organizations, those organizations that are viewing themselves as mature tend to try to take on more mature processes, right? And there's also truly an IT skill gap issue, right? And, you know, and when we look at this, it may not be there's not enough resources within an organization. It may be there's not enough to find to bring on new initiatives, right, or new projects, right? So organizations are spending a large percentage of their time, 80+%, maybe doing maintenance to keep the business running, and maybe if they're lucky they'll do 20% innovation if on a good day, right? But adding in automation and adding in the ability to really streamline some of those tedious tasks, that really does help with minimizing those challenges that organizations are running into today, right? So it may seem like, oh, well, this is a little bit more advanced than I want to take on, but it also helps with some of those other challenges we're seeing in our research, which is just the IT skill gap challenge, or the resource challenge, or the technology challenge, and the gaps around this. So I think that there's definitely a way to bridge that gap using that technology. Would you say?
The technology pieces are definitely important from an automation perspective. The more that we can automate, the more, basically the way that I teach it is, or consult on it is, if you're automating more, you're creating more time to do the things that are really important, right? Repetitive tasks that can be repeated with automation gives us the 20% of that time back to go focus on important things that for our customers, for our business, helps us focus on really hard problems that we need to resolve. So the automation piece and the technology that supports it is a big part of making an advancement in testing.
Yeah, I agree. And our research does show the same thing. I mean, I think it's whether you you pick your choice of how to get there, but understanding, start exploring how to get there. It'll overcoming the challenge of learning that will definitely reap rewards in the future by using it, right? It's definitely a benefit. Logan, I want to pivot to another market challenge that we're seeing here, and we're seeing disconnect in organizations between, we touched on it a little bit earlier in the presentation, but it's a disconnect between how organizations and the KPIs that are measured. Sometimes IT measures one set and the lines of business measure a different set of KPIs. So they're kind of marching to different tunes here, right? And when we look at that, the organizational alignment that we see with cloud native development in general, it really truly does take a village to deploy a modernized approach, right? What we're seeing in our research is a number of areas here. You can see the lines of business, you can see the different business units here. What we see is historically the people that were above the bottom row, the last row, senior IT management, they were all influencers to the organization, right? So they were ones that were using the tools. What we're seeing in our research is DevOps in particular. DevOps is an influencer, but is also a purchase maker or decision maker, but spending IT management's budget to do that. So it's interesting that when we look at this misalignment of organizations, there needs to be some harmonization across the organization in order for the success of the businesses in order to reach their business KPIs. What are your thoughts on that?
It couldn't be truer. The thinking that I like to follow is we have to measure or be tracking towards the same goals, same objectives, same KPIs. We can make those different for people that are individual contributors, but leaders need to know what they're doing on both sides of that fence, right? If we're pulling up the dichotomy of business and IT, if they're not, that problem that you're describing will continue to plague businesses that are moving into this software age, the digital age. I think the other piece is maybe more anecdotally is when we see the businesses start to take on more of the IT goals, or at least, hey, I want visibility into these. Hey, let me dig in with you and figure out what these KPIs are that we need to measure. What does it actually mean to our customers to be successful? Let's measure that together, right? The big five, they figured out how to make the gap between the business and IT easier to cross so that they can make their customers happy. They've figured out how to go to cloud providers like AWS and use the services that are provided to go faster, to enable the testing pieces that we were just talking about, to enable the small batch sizes that we were just talking about. And usually the business doesn't understand those things, but when they come across the gap and the technology team say, hey, give us less to work on so that we can focus on the things that matter to you, so that we can actually deliver on your KPI. Boom, business gets what they wanted. Boom, technology is delivering what business wants. Everybody's starting to work together better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when we were talking previously and on certain use cases and such, we were talking about this example and all the challenges and such that we're experiencing, we're seeing across the industry. And there was a use case that you shared with me about the Air Force moving to AWS Gov Cloud. I think that was a great use case to share with the audience here. What do you think?
Yep. We had a chance with the Air Force to help with some consulting and tactical work to get them to begin to adopt those practices that we're just talking about. As an AWS consulting partner, we're able to introduce our customers to world-class services with AWS, but that's just the beginning. Our consulting is just the beginning. When we start to consult in these sorts of engagements, we're actually trying to get to the goals that an organization like the Air Force wants to get to, right? They don't have a monetary goal, though I'm sure they would like to save the taxpayer some money. They have a goal of mission success, right? And so modernizing their systems, and their systems were relatively old when we look at government systems, was a huge factor in moving them forward. AWS GovCloud allowed them to think about the problem from a different architectural perspective that ultimately allowed them to save lots of money because they didn't need as many resources as they would typically need if they're running their own resources in their own applications on their own infrastructure. So the other piece that we were consulting them on is these Agile and DevOps practices that your research has showed, hey, let's adopt these things with the objective of making our ways of work better, more simple, less complicated, and less complex. And so again, a wholesale switch from on-prem infrastructure away from COBOL into modern application development with modern development languages into the AWS sphere of technology allowed for them to focus on the problems that mattered to mission success, as opposed to maintaining systems that are aging. And if I think of the guy flying that F-15, I don't want to be worried about whether or not the technology behind me is aging out. I want to be worried about making sure that I'm able to support the warfighter on the field, and all kinds of things that the Air Force helps take care of, right? The other piece is what we continue to see and saw with the Air Force is the standardization of the industry, even with the government. They're beginning to adopt more Agile practices, more DevOps practices, not for the sake of calling themselves Agile and DevOps or saying that they do Agile and DevOps. They're really starting to embrace the practices to the benefit of the people that work for them. And so, yeah, they really, I think they would say that they hit this one out of the park. The other piece that it enables, when a government agency or a military agency begins to see success with practices and technology, they come back and ask for help from people like NTT Data, from AWS, so that they can continue that march on modernizing systems that are old. They're difficult to find people to support them. They're difficult to find people to do work for them. And so it's a really, I think, humbling thing to see that happen, especially in what you would consider to be slow organizations. They really start to embrace the air power that they are, and you watch these jets fly off and go fast, and they're starting to embrace that. Hey, let's go fast. We can do it now.
Yeah, that's very cool. I mean, just to see that is just amazing. But one of the things that, you touched on a number of areas that I think resonates, certainly resonates with myself, with the research that I'm seeing, but probably more than most likely resonates with our audience here. The ability to manage your organization throughout its own life cycle, and the ability to move, taking your heritage environment and moving it to a more modernized approach is definitely going to reap those rewards that organizations are going to see with operational efficiencies, being able to innovate faster, being able to scale and grow faster, and being able to do more with less. I mean, and that statement has been used over and over again, but we are truly seeing it with our research showing that IT organizations today are asked to do workloads 3 times faster with the same resources than they were just a few years ago. So they're really trying to accelerate, and in order to do that is to be more agile, to do those bite-sized or small chunk kind of agile processes that you were talking about, Logan, and able to grow the business, at their needs. But managing the heritage environment will be a factor, right? And it has to kind of grow at a natural pace within an organization. So there will be applications, certainly with military and with government and with all organizations, there will be times when you'll have heritage applications and net new cloud-based applications all within the same ecosystem. And that just has to work together and eventually move up to that more modernized approach. So before we wrap up, I want to give you the last word, Logan. Is there anything else that you want to add to this?
Yeah, thanks. We would love for you to come visit our website to learn more about how we are supporting our customers. And what we're doing is we're bringing Agile and DevOps practices together and calling them business agility and doing business agility enablement, as I shared my title. And what we really want to do is help those folks go to the technology of the future with an AWS and with AWS's services, and come for the best world-class services and consulting to move forward in that journey that they are taking.
Well said, Logan. And Logan, I would like to thank you for your time today. And I would also like to thank the audience for attending. Thank you very much and have a great day.